Welcome back to another episode of Napkin Numbers. This episode, we have got Bob Fredrickson from Coldwell Banker Commercial. We introduced him on the last one. A great guy. We've known him for decades, doing amazing work with Coldwell Banker Commercial Danforth in Washington State. He's the president there. He's going to be helping us and being our resident expert here for real estate on a few of the topics we touched upon last time. And so these items are really, it's going to be about why it's important to have somebody that's a commercial real estate agent in that advisory role for a buyer or for a seller when you have a business that you want to acquire or sell, and there's real estate involved or a lease. So with that, I guess let's just talk through that first segment. I mean, let's talk about buyers.
Okay.
We outlined a few high level items when we talked last time, Bob, on our show. And they really were about property valuation, due diligence, compliance, return on investment. Those are kind of the major topics. But when you're working with anybody that has real estate and maybe they're buying a business, what do you think is probably the concern you see the most?
When they're buying a business with real estate, it's the same as if they're not buying a business. It's going to be, are they getting a fair deal on that piece of property? And then from that point, if this is napkin numbers. So when we're thumbnailing, is the property priced right? Then we go from there. Okay, it's priced right. Let's dive in deeper. And is it environmentally sound? Are there other tenants within this building that we need to check out? Are they buying a business and there's other tenants within the building that we need to analyze leases, analyze the tenants' financials themselves, because this is an investment property. So there's a lot to dive into, and then structural and all the different things that come with feasibility when buying a property.
So if I was buying a business and I said, wow, there's real estate with it, I want to pick it up, why wouldn't I just have my transaction attorney write up the deal for me?
The transaction attorney will be a good help for writing up the transaction, obviously, but that attorney's not going to have boots on the ground. They're not going to have, we are going to do a feasibility study on this property. I don't know if they're going to want the transaction attorney to be diving into the additional leases and that sort of thing. And quite often, kind of like on a deal that you and I are working right now, where the seller of the business, in our case, they're looking at some of their other tenancies in a building, and they need to analyze those leases to tee up the building, to get the building ready to sell after the business sells. So looking at those other tenancies in the building is always important, and just making sure they're, from an incoming buyer's perspective, making sure that it's a good tenant, financially sound, that the lease makes sense, and that they really understand what they're buying, how much term there is left on the lease, what are the escalations, and so with all of that, we can put together our pro forma or our analysis of how this property is going to perform over the next 5 to 10 years, and they can, decide if that's the type of investment that they want to dive into.
It sounds like there can be different scenarios where it's helpful to have somebody that's a commercial broker, especially when it's more complex, because you have more context for the amount. For instance, maybe legally, a transactional attorney could draft the documents, but them knowing the difference between $12,000 a month and $12,000 a year, is that appropriate for the lease? That's something that your team or anybody that's a commercial real estate advisor would be able to have more insight into.
Definitely. So the analytics of the rents and in that market will be critical, because if the property's leasing out at really high lease rates, that maybe might make sense, but if there's any sort of blip, you might be in trouble. So those are things that they need to look out for, that we would look out for them, and just knowing the market. what's going on, like around the Puget Sound area. It's Sound Transit. Sometimes it's light rail coming through. Is that going to take the property out potentially? I've seen that a lot, in our market. Or is it going to add exponential value to the property because there's going to be a light rail station, 2 blocks down the road. So, that example is just, that's where a broker who knows that market and knows what's going on in that neighborhood, so to speak, is critical.
Got it. So that valuation, those market conditions, that really comes down to somebody that's in that local market, that's got boots on the grounds, that can see it, that's familiar with the comparables or what's happening.
Right.
That's really helpful. Okay, perfect.
Yep. Yep. That's where the broker brings a ton of value. And that's where you'll know if you've got a good broker or not, because within the first 5 minutes of that conversation, they better know, what the lease rates are, what things are selling for, what's kind of going, what's going on in the neighborhood. What's the scuttlebutt maybe, or is there a gas station down the street that had a big cleanup, and this property might be downhill from that gas station. So you better make sure that it didn't migrate onto your property. So those are things that, an attorney's not going to catch.
Excellent. Great information on the buy side. Now, let's flip it and talk about the sale side.
Okay.
I'm a seller. I'm selling my commercial real estate. Don't know much about these buyers that are taking over. And what are some of the risks that can fall on me that I would want to know about, being the seller, that a commercial broker could educate me on?
Some of the risks, I think, it's always a balancing act between the M&A broker and the real estate broker. One of the risks is, how do you balance out the value of the business versus the value of the property? And it always, quite often, Rahsaan, you and I talk about it, how much, if it's an owner user property and it's a single tenant building, it's a manufacturing facility, say, and the seller of the manufacturing company is leasing from himself, where do we want to, do we want to have a higher lease rate and maybe a lower valuation for the company, or vice versa? So I think first, that's kind of a conversation that all of us have, the M&A broker, the commercial broker, and the owner of the real estate and the business should have right out of the gate. So doing that balancing act to make sure that they're getting the biggest bang for their buck. And you, Rahsaan and Scott, you guys have taught me a lot on that side in regards to how to, set yourself up, tee it up for maximum, maximum profits, basically, for the seller of those businesses. So that's important, and just being ready to go on to market and take out everything that we just talked about, being, the environmental, the leases, and making sure all the things are high and tight. That's where we come in and we do the lease review, we do the environmental review before we put it on the market, and just make sure everything's crisp and clean. So when it does go on the market, we feel really comfortable that we're selling a good asset, and no one's really going to be able to poke any holes in our story and our valuations.
I'm glad you mentioned the teeter-totter effect, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to sell the business and the real estate together, which one do you want to get more on? And that's where the other advisor at the table that would be there with us is the CPA, right? Pointing to saying, hey, maybe it's better that they get more value in the real estate from a tax perspective, or it's better that they get it in the business. However it works, yeah, that is a very common discussion in any of these transactions that we run up against.
Yeah, no, it's critical. It's critical, and it's just through the transactions that we've worked on over the years, it's opened my eyes to, I'm able to better counsel my clients too, that are getting ready to tee up a business sale and a property sale, to get them thinking about it early on in the game, for sure.
If you had to highlight one more risk from a seller's perspective that you've seen often, what would it be?
In this market, the sellers need to make sure that they're just not too overzealous on their pricing or dig their heels in on the pricing. They really need to understand the balancing act that it is with interest rates and what's going on in the market. I mean, I was speaking at a luncheon yesterday, and we were talking about just the standoff right now between sellers and buyers. The sellers still want, a significantly higher price than maybe 5 years ago. The buyers are waiting for the bottom to drop out of the market, and neither are happening. The buyers aren't getting the bargain basement sale prices, and sellers are going to have to give in on their numbers a little bit. Not as much as they probably thought they were going to, though, so they should be happy about that. But I think, just being very realistic about the numbers and put themselves in that buyer's shoes, and then come up with a valuation that's going to work. And, typically if both sides of a deal are kind of hurting maybe a little bit at the closing table, that means we did a good job. Everybody had to give a little bit, and that's typically, that's when you did a good job as a salesperson.
It's our definition of a successful transaction. 90% happy on each side.
Yep, exactly. I like that. I'm gonna use that. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. That means if one's 100%, that means the other side got screwed, right? So we don't want that.
Nope, not at all.
All right. I want to thank Bob Fredrickson from Coldwell Banker Commercial Danforth for joining us today for our episode of Napkin Numbers. That concludes the talk, and hope to see you on the next one. Thank you.